Welcome back. This is the Aviation RC Noob podcast. This is episode 63. I'm going to call this What is Scale RC? My name is Matthew Allen. I'm normally here with my co-host Joseph Webb. But unfortunately, we had a big scheduling conflict last minute, and that kind of happens when we have the holidays, and we're recording this right before Thanksgiving in America here. And it's a holiday that is, I guess, steeped around spending time with family and friends. And with that means that we're traveling all over Timbuktu and back again. And when I was looking at our schedule, it didn't look like we'd be back, until well into December. So I'm putting together this quick little mono mini-sode, that's what I'll call it, because I'm going to make this pretty brief, but I wanted to make sure that we had sent out some of our community information, a quick update from me on the hobby and full-scale stuff, brief news, because there's a couple quick items that have happened over the last couple weeks, and we can probably talk about it in a little bit more detail if it's prudent next time. I'm going to skip our history segment, but I'll kind of tell you what I had in my back pocket. And then I'll talk briefly about what it means, a little bit about what it means to be scale RC. I might go into the history today. Anyway, so let's see, without further ado, let me talk about what I've been up into the hobby, or just been what's up in general. I know it's been a little weird for me lately, as I've been hot on the job search the last month, and that's been taking up a great deal of my energy and efforts. I have accepted a job with a new company, which is exciting. So I'm in the throes of kind of pulling all that together and getting on board with them, which is amazing. By the time we talk in the next episode, I should be starting on my first day at work on the 5th. So I'm looking forward to that. And in the meantime, I've got to catch up with a lot of maintenance items that are happening around the house here that I've never really had time to do. So I'll be doing that. Probably be exhausted physically from that. But hopefully in that spare time, I'll kind of be able to come up with a new schedule and get back into some of the fervent building and a little bit more regular flying schedule, I'm looking forward to that. So what have I been up to? As you know, I closed up the Fury. I put the control surfaces on. I've tested that they work right, but I have yet to figure out really exactly where the CG is, and part of that has to be me squirreling, never quite really getting into exactly where it sits. I know it's in the literature, but the literature is in FMT from September 2019, which is, I believe it looks like a German magazine. And so it's not quite the simplest to get a hold of, and it's not quite the simplest to get the details on. So I know I found it before. I thought I downloaded it. Anyway, I might just have to go the old school fashioned way. Every time I put a battery or a location on it, it seems to, I can't quite find the exact thing, and I make one or two attempts, and then I kind of, get distracted by the next thing. And the next thing for me was putting together the FT Kraken. I actually started at the very bottom of the wing, taped and glued the whole bottom section, which you know for any flying wing, especially the Kraken. I think that one's somewhere around, it looks like almost 100 inches, maybe about 80 inches. It's a big one. So I've started piecing that together. It's pretty straightforward. I've got the wing spars glued. I have the power pod bays glued up and the actual power pods glued up a bit. I haven't put together the motor systems to put on it, but I have them sitting here. I think trying to remember where I sloughed those off to. part of this next week is to actually start organizing, or actually to get the whole system up here organized. So that's one less thing I'm thinking about while I start the new job. Okay. Anyway, so the working on the FT Kraken was to kind of as kind of a side project to helping design a new large combat style plane for Flight Fest 23 with a good buddy from the Flight Test forums. He's the one who would help me with kind of the kit-like contraption there. Anyway, all right, so that's about that. I also, after 3 months of not being able to really find time or make time for the full-scale aviation, with the advent of maybe the promise of not having to scrimp and save, and realizing it's been 3 months, it was time to get back to full scale if I could. So I decided to set up a lesson just the other day, and then I went out and decided to kick the mud off the tires, as it were. It was a nice, relaxing flight. In a deceptively high ceiling, it looked like it was somewhere around 1,000 feet, or maybe 1,500 feet, which is too low, as you need 500-foot vertical clearance from the bottom of any cloud formation, as well as 1,000-foot side visibility, and 2,000 feet of horizontal visibility, and 1,000 feet on top of an existing cloud. So knowing that information, we kind of looked up and I was like, oh, I don't know. And now my instructor is flight instrument rated, and the plane we're going into had flight instruments enough to be able to fly around and get out of any situation if it was too low. She had the training to be able to land if we were close. But when we got up there, we realized that that lower layer was kind of like this wispy, I don't know what you'd call that, kind of like a mist. Enough where you could kind of see through it, but it made the bottoms of the clouds at 3,000 feet look like they were a lot lower. And consequently, we were able to go up and fly around. So I took kind of I'll call it a joyride out to the training zone, which is out to the southeast direction of the airport. Got familiar with the flight controls and kind of refamiliarized myself with just how things kind of go when you're flying, and reorienting myself to the instruments and the feel of the plane, and which is honestly, it's kind of important when you're dealing with you haven't been flying in a while. Go grab a plane that you're familiar with, a plane that you're comfortable with. Go take it out, and don't do anything crazy. Start out slow, start out simple, start out basic, and then when you're done, then start kind of easing into some of the maneuvers. And so at that point, we had gone through, and then I started, as we came back to the airport, I started making the radio calls. And I felt, I'm always worried about the radio calls. It feels super important, and they are. But we're at a small airport where there was no traffic that day. So it was, I'll call it low risk. So it was a great time to kind of get refamiliarized. And, within about 2 or 3 radio calls, it had been like I hadn't taken a gap at all. So then I went, and for the next hour or so, I performed 5 landings with a very light cross breeze, like crosswind, and it was 5 landings that went really, I would call them, and my instructor called them, except for I think one which would have been okay, but with her, like a quick little correction, helped to be a really, solo-worthy landing. It wasn't anything crazy. She was more just kind of reminding me about how to land in crosswind conditions. It's basically turning the ailerons to basically have the plane correct for the crosswind, for the crosswind push on the plane, and then using the rudder to align with the center line of the plane, which is kind of how you should land in almost every situation. So, and then also making sure that as you get slower and as you get closer to the ground, that you need to, exaggerate the controls. Because as you go slower, you don't have as much controls. I think anybody who's flown a remote control airplane can remember how, when you slow down, you start losing control of the airplane as the air pushing the control surfaces has less effect because of the speed. So it does same for all full-scale applications. So it's just kind of a reminder, which was wonderful. That's the reason why we're out there. So I felt really good about that. I'll be setting myself up with once the plane gets out of the 100-hour mandatory inspection. We'll be back in business, and at that point, I'll have confirmed that everything's in order and work is on the way. So I'll be able to get back into it and hopefully get that cleared up and ready to go by summer. I'm hoping I should be able to get in the air on my own as a full-scale pilot. It'll be pretty exciting. So no promises or anything, but those were my hopes at the time. So so that's kind of what I've been up to. I can't say it's like terribly exciting, which is part of why this is a mini-sode. We don't have a whole lot to talk about there. So let's get into, I guess, the community section. And this is part of the reason, and I know it's not a lot, but it's one of the reasons that I wanted to make sure that I did this episode and sent this out as something. We have a build night on Friday the 2nd. And if we didn't put something out now, we weren't going to get anything out until, we probably would sit down and record in a manner that we would get it out on the 2nd or the 3rd, which does no good in helping promote our community build night. So on December Friday the 2nd, between 8 and 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll be conducting a build night. The one in November was excellent. Early November, it was a great time. We had a lot of wonderful builders on, some young, some seasoned veterans, seasoned veterans of build night as well as of hobby in general. A lot of great discussions, part of the reason why we get on there, and a lot of interesting builds that we're getting worked on, a lot of great sharing. That's one of the reasons why I love our build nights. They're a lot of fun. If you haven't been to one, go join us here in December on the 2nd. Bring your plane that you're working on, bring us to your build table, and let's sit down and chat together. It's a lot of fun. I know what I did in the last one. I worked on assembling the foam uproar, which I did. I completed the wings and the fuselage, and it's looking amazing. I just haven't put the control horns on and put some landing gear, some basics put in there. Nothing crazy, nothing really hindering me, except I just I've been very limited in my time at the build table. And then, of course, Joe and I have talked about putting together some sort of bringing in the New Year's, maybe December 31st or maybe a January 1st build night, something at the end of the first of the year. We'll get a little bit more details as Joe and I hash out what we can pull together. I know both of us have invitations to different New Year's parties, so maybe the 31st isn't going to work out the best. But we'll figure it out, and we'll get you the details by the next time. By the next time we get together here on probably the 3rd is when you're going to hear from us next. All right, and then I guess let's get on to news. There's actually been a little bit of news. I don't have any news clip. This breaking news. All right. Well, there's some sad news and some glad news for those who are following the FAA. What is that called? Remote ID. So that's a glad news. Is that the AMA is now a CBO. So they're a community-based organization. They are now set up with, they're working with the FAA and submitting all of, as I understand it, they're submitting all of the sanctioned AMA fields as FRIAs, the federally recognized, basically identified areas to go fly. So you do not need a remote ID unit on your plane to go fly in the air, and don't need to comply with a remote ID in that fashion. You are complying by going to an AMA field. So they're really excited about that. Now, not everybody is as excited about that as, if you are an AMA member, the Aeronautical Modeling Association in America here. I know there's a similar organizations in Europe and in out in Australia. I know a couple organizations in different countries have popped up, and they all kind of form that same thing. They create a community, a set of rule systems. Oftentimes, in the case of the AMA, they provide insurance for should something happen with your plane and it crashes into other stuff that costs a great deal of money. Most modelers don't have the funds to just be able to go, uh-oh. And it's kind of a weird case. And a lot of insurances don't fully cover those kinds of incidents. So to protect against that kind of thing and make sure that the hobby remains safe, not only safe, but protected, that the users remain protected, they provide insurance. So it's official that the AMA has been granted the community-based organization status, which also means, I think, as we were talking last time, that if you fly somewhere else and you want to start up a club or work with an organization to set up your own FRIA, you can tell them that you're flying under the AMA's community guidelines, as maybe not a member of the CBO, but those are the guidelines that you're flying within, and submit your own FRIA, possibly. Go into the, there's a couple websites we'll give you a link to if I can remember to do it, probably not this time around, but if you look at our last episode, we had a handful of links on where you can go to learn a little bit more about that. But for example, as a dissenting opinion, I just watched a video that JetX, kind of the clickbaity, I don't know if it's even clickbaity, that here's the end of our hobby. It was kind of like, the boiling frog situation. This is the part at which we're in trouble. It's kind of where he's at. And he's basically saying that as the industry continues to comply with these regulations that have clearly stated when they first came out, that basically they're intending to get everybody who's a remote unit in compliance, and that all the remote operated units are basically fully identified, and that they can be set up so that they cannot operate if the FAA doesn't want that. So they have basically full autonomy for all remote controlled aircraft in the skies, period. Now, if you think that that's the way the sky should be, then by all means go for it. I'm not going to tell you one way or another, but I think he's got an excellent point. I think it's important to hear the different perspectives on it. Obviously your opinions are going to stand where they are. I tend to agree with that opinion, that it's the slippery slope with basically giving away the freedoms on the basis of money, that they're essentially being paid by large corporations are paying politicians to ensure that the FAA, which is very true, the FAA is purely a regulatory agency, and they are governed by the politicians that set the regulations, right? That demand that the regulatory agency do certain things. So it's controlled by the politicians that we elect. So if we want to change, we elect new politicians to demand different policies. All the FAA is doing what they've been required to do by law to a degree. However, it does look like it's a big grab, an overreach of policy and requirements by them, in my opinion. But at the same point, that's my opinion. I'm not the only one with it, and I know a lot of people have other ones. And if you want to talk to me about it or discuss it, you can join us in our Discord forums. I'd also like to take a quick moment to thank our sponsors. They would be our patrons. If you want to, you can join our patrons and help us out with the show by donating a little bit a month. We have no set amounts. You can donate what you like over at aviation Patreon.com at aviation. Let's see, patreon.com/aviationrcnew. So that's news. That's kind of big, and I imagine a flight test will be following up with the next group. I know there's a handful of other groups that are looking for FPV. Freedom Coalition is another group that's looking to be designated as a CBO, as they are kind of a different aspect of the hobby, and their requirements and needs are different than traditional remote aviationists. So, all right. So now on to the second half of our show, as it were. We can talk about the history. Oh, and then that was the happy part. The sad part of the news, and I'm sorry, that's kind of the important piece here. Let's see. Okay, why didn't I bring? Let's see, what date? I wanted to get the date. Let's see, 5 days ago. That would put it on the 14th. So on the 14th of November, 2023, two rare aircraft collided at the Wings Over Dallas Air Show. We'll give a link to a write-up, an article on the air show collision. It has a video. It's pretty graphic. It's exactly what happened from the perspective of a couple ground cameras that were kind of on the air show. Officials in Dallas, Texas are investigating the cause of fatal mid-air collision between two historic military planes during the air show on Saturday. The incident instantly caused the planes to crash to the ground. They were actually very low, as doing low flybys for the crowd at the air show, sending an explosion of fire and black smoke into the afternoon sky. The collision occurred around 1:20 or 13:20 over Dallas Executive Airport, about 10 miles from downtown Dallas. A video posted on Twitter by spectators captured the World War II era planes, a B-17 Flying Fortress bomber and a Bell P-63 King Cobra fighter crashed on impact. Dallas Fire and Rescue confirmed that people were not injured on the ground. Basically, there were no spectators and no ground operators for the airport injured during the crash. It was just the pilots who were casualties and fatalities. Although they're still, as the writing of the article, which was basically the next day or later that evening, it wasn't quite certain how many pilots were operating the vehicles at the time. I think there was an independent, I'll call it anecdotal statement that nobody believed that the B-17 was holding any passengers, because oftentimes they'll hire out flights or they'll haul out passenger seats for their things. But I think they were doing a performance, and during the performances, it's purely just the stated pilots. And I think the B-17 can hold up to 4 pilots, and the Bell Air Cobra, King Cobra. My mistake. It's the King Cobra. Only holds 1 pilot. So I think there were up to 5 casualties in this collision. So, and I think they said it best, and I will reiterate it, that our hearts go out to the families. I think everybody in the aviation community, and including model aviation, our hearts go out to the families, friends, and colleagues, past and present, to the pilots. So very sad news, and I hope we all kind of give pause that it is, and if this is something that did happen, and it looks, just from my anecdotal observation of what I saw in the video, it looks like the Bell King Cobra was coming in over top of the B-17 at an angle at which you really couldn't see over the nose. So it's almost like as large as the B-17 is or was, it was, I'll call it, primarily in a blind spot. And, the B-17 got collided at basically the intersection where the wing intersects the fuse at the rear of the trailing edge. And that, I don't think as a pilot you can even see back there. So it was one of those things that once once the collision happened, both planes kind of they just fell to pieces in the sky, and that was pretty much. And it wasn't shortly after that that they were on the ground. There was no chance for anybody to eject. So sad news. Let's kind of take a moment to pause and commemorate their loss. I guess that brings us to the second half of our show, where it's the history. And I chose the Bell P-63 King Cobra in honor of the pilot who lost their life flying the King Cobra at the air show. I'm not gonna do it justice, but I'm gonna try my best to kind of cover what made that plane so special. If I recall right, that was the last flying model of the King Cobra. There were a number of them made, and they played an important part in World War II, as you'll learn. So kind of a very sad day that was one of the last of its kind that you could see at air shows. So the Bell P-63 King Cobra is an American fighter aircraft that was developed by Bell Aircraft during World War II, based on the preceding Bell P-39 Air Cobra. The P-63's design incorporated suggestions from the P-39 pilots, and it was superior to its predecessor in nearly every respect. So basically, as they watched this plane get out and they got a lot of comments back, they realized they could improve it. So they did with the P-63. It was not accepted. It was not accepted for combat use by the United States Army Air Forces. However, it was used during the World War II by the Soviet Air Force, which had also been the most prolific user of the P-39. It looks like so the first prototype flew on December 7th, 1942, exactly 1 year after Pearl Harbor, and Bell's chief test pilot Bob Stanley did not hesitate to compare it to the Supermarine Spitfire. So it has incredible flight tendencies. Its speed was pretty good, and we'll learn about why it may not have matched the Supermarine Spitfire or the Mustang, or even the Thunderbolt as far as speed, but it was a superior, it was a superb fighter craft. So despite being heavier, the P-63D was the fastest version of the P-63, reaching 437 miles an hour at 30,000 feet above sea level. The wing was lengthened by 10 inches, and it was powered by an Allison V1710-109 engine, which produced 1,425 horsepower, which is pretty serious. Major changes. A major change was the removal of the automobile-type doors and the installation of a bubble canopy. So rather than have kind of a door that kind of swings out, they just said, let's make a bubble canopy and have it kind of push back. Is what it looks like. I'm just looking to see how it's set up there. The performance of the P-63D had put it on par with the P-51 Mustang and the P-47 Thunderbolt, but it was destroyed during diving tests. One of the things that we're going to go through some of the different, I found a good summary of kind of the iterations, because this plane had a number of iterations, and it seems like they kind of had a couple tests, found a model that worked well, and they produced a bunch of those, and then they decided to make a variation, and then they kind of went around on those, and then found a good, a model that everybody was happy with, so they made a number of those, and vice versa, and continued on with that kind of method where there'd be one or two test models of a certain type, and then they said, oh, this one's perfect for a certain condition, and then they would they'd continue and put it into mass production. So let me go through that, and then we'll go through some of the general characteristics and its performance, and then I'll talk about one or two of the unique characteristics of it that made the King Cobra desirable in the Soviet theater. Okay, so let's go through this. So the designation was originally the XP-63. There were two of those made. It was basically the XP39, the Bell, so P39 with a laminar flow airfoil. And they had a kind of, and then they also put in ARCN engines in this. And that's one of the characteristics that we noticed, that they didn't use Merlin engines, as those were designated, and those were used in the Mustangs and the other aircraft that were out in the day. So they had to find a different engine maker, because those were priority for those aircraft. So they found the ARCN V1710 they ended up settling on the 109, I believe, was what it ended up being. But one of the major engines was also the 1710, 1710-117 engine. See that had about, looks like 70 horsepower less. And that's why the final version, the 109 version, was one of the fastest. It did have an extra 70 horsepower. But for all of the earlier models, and probably the most prolific version of the King Cobra, had the, looks like either the 93 or 117 is the last couple digit designation. And those had 1,325 horsepower. Let me go through this. So the XP63 was basically the X39E with a laminar flow wing. And then they had two of those made, which I think we talked about how they both had failures during their initial tests, but they kind of determined that was exactly the direction they wanted to go. The XP63A, the two of those were made, and they basically added bomb racks to those. P63, so then they took off the X once they realized that that's the model everybody wanted to go with. They put it in production. They produced 1,726 of those. And there's, of course, different versions, A-1. I'm not going to go through all the different serial numbers or anything like that, but basically, as the A-1 through 10, they kind of went through the serial numbers every, what is that? Looks like 50? Somewhere about there. Every blocks of 30. So depending on which number, or 300, every 300. Anyway, so production block aircraft, so P63A, there were 1,726 produced. They're blocks 1 through 10. They had the ARCN V-1710-93 engines that produced 1,324 horsepower, 25 horsepower. The RP63, there were 100 of them made. They were basically made for aerial target aircraft. They were oftentimes painted a bright orange in an effort to make them incredibly visible. Sorry, the RP63A, so the column kind of shifted that letter down. Again, same engine. Then they went to the B, and that basically improved the XP63A. None of them were made. The project was canceled there, but they continued on to the 63C. There are 1,227 made. It was some basic improvements on the P63A. It doesn't go into details as to what they are. You can look them up. I'm sure you can. As there were a lot of them made, it looks like it was a big improvement. Probably higher armaments, like armoring of the different parts of the aircraft is typically what that was. I know one of them included maybe the changing out of going from the car doors to the bubble canopy and that kind of thing. The RP63C was basically, I believe that's another target aircraft typically. Looks like 200 of those were made using the 117 engine with a 1,355 horsepower. So an extra 30 horsepower, and that's same with the P63C. The P63D, they had the bubble canopy at that point, and they were using the 109 engine, the ARCN V-1710-109 engine. That's the one with the 1,425 horsepower. It looks like the P63E, there were 13 of those made. The D version, there's only one. It's basically a test of the bubble canopy. and the new engine. The 13 were made of the E model, which is identical to the D, except the canopy is a new canopy and a new prop, using the same engine. P63F, there were 2 of those made, enlarged the fin and the rudders, and that again, that used the Allison V1710-135 engine. I'm not sure what the variation in the engine was, but it produced the same amount of horsepower, so it might have been improvements in airflow capacity. RP63G, there were 32 of those made. There were aerial target aircraft. So it was that project was eventually canceled. Using the same engine. XP, so the same 135 designated engine. XP63H was one of those. It was a conversion, and it used the P63E, and it converted that. Just trying to think of. So that was just a converted P63E, and I think they were just testing a new wing formation. The L39-2 with swept wing and 4-blade prop. So the RP63G, called the pinball, dedication, flying targets with indicated 2 prototypes, 30 production aircraft that incorporated a flush dorsal inlet. And we can talk about that. That's actually one of the air intakes for the engine. The engine was mounted aft of the wing, which is what it looks like. And there was an intake right behind the canopy. And that is one of the things that stands out about the look of the Air Cobra. That right behind the bubble canopy, just as the trailing edge comes into the fuselage, on the upper side of the fuselage is a big air intake scoop. I'll call it big. It's actually pretty small. But that is pretty much an identifying. It also looks like it has a straight, if you look at the fuselage, that's a straight on the top and a kind of a fish belly, as you would, on the underside. So a kind of curved, sweeping belly to come down to where the wing sits and back up to the tail. Let's go back. Flush dorsal inlet, but more significantly, lights that would come on when the target was struck with frangible munitions. So that way, the RP63G, the pinball. So that was a target aircraft that was heavily armored, and obviously it sounds like they had basically a small mesh that when it got hit with frangible rounds, it would connect circuits, I guess, and then cause the lights in aircraft to flash. That way you knew if you shot it and you hit it, it was a way for immediate feedback for the pilots who were being tested or who were practicing. It's pretty cool. In 1948, the remaining RP-63Gs were redesignated QF-63Gs. So, and then there were also L39 2 war surplus P-63Cs modified by Bell under Navy contract for flight testing of a low-speed and stall characteristics of a high-speed wing design. So they were testing more of a higher sweep wing setup of the L39, and they designated that the P-63Cs. So, which is pretty cool. We have a little picture of it. It's a pretty interesting kind of look where the Air Cobra has a pretty straight, plan form. So it's almost like a standard Spitfire kind of setup. The leading edge sweeps back, the trailing edge sweeps a little forward, so it kind of it's just a straight tapered wing. So they looked at that C version that they basically tapered back the wing at 23, looks like about 23 degrees for the leading edge, and the trailing edge was tapering or falling back maybe 5 degrees. So anyway, yeah. So there you go. Look for some 3D. It's a really beautiful looking aircraft. That's the kind of aircraft that you can look as if you can make one that's maybe a carved. It's got a lot of great, beautiful curves on it. Looks like if you can get one that's fully molded, or you can find I'll call it the FD Master Series, where it's not boxy, but it could easily be made as a fairly boxy version, and it would look beautiful in the sky for sure. And I bet it would perform as well as the P51 Mustang. Nice. So let's go through the general characteristics, some of the performance limits and the armaments. It had a crew of 1. It was 32 foot 8 inches, or 9.96 meters. The wingspan was 38 foot 4 inches, and that's 11.68 meters. The height was 12 foot 7 inches. That's 3.8 meters. Wing area was 248 square feet, or 23 square meters. The airfoil, the root was NACA 66-116. The tips were NACA 66-216. So you could tell that they had a change in airfoil shape from root to tip. It had estimated gross weight of 6,800 pounds. So its empty weight was 6,800 pounds. The gross weight was 8,800 pounds. It's an extra 2,000 pounds. Max takeoff weight was 10,700 pounds. So you're looking at an extra payload of 1,900 pounds of munitions and guns and bombs and things like that. So the power plant was 1 Allison V-1710-. We went through the different types. Basically, the 117 was its primary engine. It was a V12 liquid-cooled piston engine, 1,800 horsepower. Generally, obviously that increased. Actually, its actual performance horsepower were a little bit less, but that was the ideal. The propellers were 4-bladed constant speed propeller. So they look like 4 big paddles sticking out the front. Like you could pull some serious air across it. Performance. The maximum speed was 410 miles an hour, although you heard that it did have a version of it that went, I think, 430 437 miles an hour. But generally speaking, it went 410 miles an hour. The range was 450 miles, which isn't pretty good, but it's not terribly long. And that was one of the discussions about the aircraft, is that, I mean, it really wasn't a long-range fighter. It was more of an interceptor, which was perfect for the Russian or the Russian forces, as most of the time they were being pushed back, or at the front lines, kind of pushing in and intercepting, German forces on their eastern border, or the Russians' western border. So they have aircraft or airfields nearby, so they didn't have to travel across the Channel and across half of Great Britain to be able to get to Germany. So that was one of the reasons for their use of it. Plus, it was a great interceptor. Had a lot of it was agile, it was nimble, it was fast. Let's see, you could add drop tanks to it and get it out to 2,200 miles. So it could, if you were getting it from place to place and it did need armaments on it, you could certainly load it up with fuel. Service ceiling is 43,000 feet, which is pretty close to the average ceiling for most of those aircraft. It said that they really couldn't go all the way up as high because they didn't have the turbocharger, and the engines didn't have the fuel injectors as some of the German models and some of the later American models with the Merlin engine. So the performance dropped at the higher altitudes. However, at the lower altitudes and in intercept conditions, with the rate of climb of 2,500 feet per minute, it was able to kind of get up and out and get into the air and do its thing and do it well. So primarily speaking, again, it wasn't being produced for the American forces specifically because they were not used in the United States Army Air Forces. So it was primarily used in the Russian forces. Now they took these aircraft and they tested the living snot out of these things. One of the guys noticed it had a I'll call it a fatal spin characteristic, flat spin characteristic. I said basically once you got in it, you could try anything you want. And I guess the test pilot flew it so hard and tested the limits of this plane so much that the plane ended up actually, that he tested, had a bent fuselage from trying to get the spin, trying to get the plane out of the spin and all the tests he did. He said that after a certain point, he just said, look, put in the manual, if you get into the flat spin condition, abandon the aircraft. There's no way you're getting out of it. As much as he probably found a couple ways to get out of it, it was very difficult to do, and most of the time it was unrecoverable. So that was one of the probably biggest drawbacks of the aircraft. It wasn't a condition you got into very often, but if you did, I'm trying to remember what brings on stall spin characteristics, and it's usually lower speeds, high turns, high rate of turn, where you are basically completely dropping one wing in a tight turn where it's getting absolutely no airflow. And then as you start to spin around, you can't get out of it because of the nature. You can't get any control in any of the surfaces to be able to really pull yourself out of that. Anyway, so let's go on to, let's see. The wing loading was 35.5 pounds per square foot. If you remember back to our last episode, I'm trying to remember, what does that make us? You can go back and see what kind of wing loading that is for an aircraft. I think in that level of aircraft full scale, I mean, it's a Slight and Agile, it's a sport, it's a fighter aircraft. So power to mass, it was 0.2 horsepower per pound. I don't know if I can't make heads or tails of that. But that could be interesting to some of you. The armaments, it had one, and that's one of the things I noticed that was pretty different about this. It had one 37 millimeter, that's 1.5 inch M4 cannon firing through the propeller hub. From the A9 version of the aircraft onward, the M4 gun was replaced by the slightly improved M10 37 millimeter cannon, which used disintegrating link ammunition belt, increasing the ammo capacity to 58 rounds. The M10 also had slightly higher rate of fire. Those 37 millimeter rounds are massive. If you got hit by one of those during air combat, that was pretty much the end of your plane. It would rip whatever it hit to shreds. That's a big round. And that's one of the things that's kind of what's sitting up in the front, in front of the pilot. So that's pretty interesting to see when you see. It's like, whoa, those are. Look at some of the videos that they have on those, and you'll kind of see what's going on in the front there. It's pretty impressive to see. They also had 4 half-inch or 12.7 millimeter M2 Browning machine guns. There are 2 synchronized in the nose and 2 in the wings. They also had the capacity for 1,500 pounds of bombs. The bomb load was on the wing and the fuselage. So there you go. So that's the Air Cobra, the Bell P-63, King Cobra. So on to the third half of our show. And it's going to be a quick topic here. What is it to be called a scale RC aircraft? I know we kind of covered this before, so this is why it's probably a perfect topic for today. The exact scale, let's see. I'll put a link to one of the sites that I went to, and we can get into more detail on this about, maybe a discussion about what level of detail of scale are you willing to put into your aircraft, right? So there seems to be like 3 basic scale levels, and we're talking about scale size, which we can talk about that briefly, just kind of cover that again. That's mostly what we covered the first time. Size scales goes from like a peanut scale. Peanut scale RC aircraft are defined as a model aircraft with a wingspan of 13 inches or less, or giant scale, which is as designated by the International Miniature Aircraft Association, or the IMAA. They sanction giant scale aircraft events in the U.S. So an RC aircraft must be a true quarter scale RC airplane. So all the dimensions are 1/4 the full-size aircraft, or have at least an 80-inch wingspan to be considered a giant scale in the IMAA. A biplane must have a minimum of 60-inch wingspan. I think they also have something on jets that they have to have a combined length and width to be like something like I want to say like 140 inches or something along those lines, or 120-inch wings inches combined between the length and the width on a jet. So let's talk about so those are like the size scale limits, right? But let's go back and talk about these scale types as far as level of detail, right? And this is what you run into when you look at buying a new aircraft. If you're going to buy one online, you'll be like, oh, it's a whatever scale. Sometimes you can say, it's a semi-scale, or it's a standoff scale. You will rarely find an exact scale. Sometimes you will, but it's pretty rare. Or you'll have, a fun scale. So the exact scale and is the big difference is the details. And we're talking, it's not uncommon for the plane of this caliber to take many years to complete, as they'll often start from the base scale kits, which are dimensionally scaled. And so they have the exact width of the airfoil, they have the length of the airfoil, and the fuselage, all those dimensions are scaled down precisely, right? But what they're not going to have is a lot of the detail that gets added after the fact. And the details that get added go from there. And when you look at some of the winners, and that's one of the people I wanted to get on, was one of the Top Gun scale model recipients. Any of the top three, the people who do those models are really incredible. I think the one who won last year, maybe even the year before, it was now I'm blanking on the aircraft. The 71 SR-71 Blackbird, done like a perfect scale replica of it, and I mean it was perfect, like to the point where he had pictures of everything. The landing gear was precise, everything, the cockpit, all the details running at any open panels that you could open, all the details were in it. It's truly incredible, to the point of looking at he had the different matte finish types of coatings on the aircraft. Maybe not precisely the non-reflective black or anything like that, but you could tell the leading edges of the wings on that aircraft have a different sheen, and he replicated that. And it's incredible. Just go see if you can look it up, Top Gun winners of the last couple of years, and you'll just see the level of detail is incredible. It's not uncommon for somebody who's building that scale or that type of aircraft to truly spend years making the details, especially if you're looking at like a biplane or anything where they have a lot of rigging. We're talking one of these guys, he was making, I'm trying to remember what kind of aircraft it was. He was looking to see what kind of the Royal Aircraft Factory SC-5, the World War I British biplane, and the biplanes had a lot of rigging and they had a lot of detail. So he's got a picture of in the thing. There's rudder control pedals with all the different metal pieces and what looked like the stringers and the cables and all that. It's just incredible. And it's one of those things where if you love the scale details, this is the kind of thing you want to get into. And the sky's the limits. Just know if you also, in those Top Gun competitions, it's required that you fly, I think, 3 successful circuits with it, as well as showing its performance. Oftentimes those guys will have a professional pilot come and pilot the aircraft for them. Just incredible, some of the detail. A perfect replica of the Browning machine gun that's on the aircraft. The cockpit details and all the instruments are there. Oftentimes they may not function, but they are exact replicas of the cockpits that were in those airplanes. And they're usually sections that you can remove of the fuselage to be able to look at these details. Even to the point of the bomb racks. Some of these older bombs, it had a whole connection mechanism, and just incredible detail that you could see in these. And it could be even to the point of rivets. If you look at I'm going to try to, there's a couple guys on the FT forums, and, when they do a plane, they want to take the time, and they will literally, put a projection of the aircraft, and where you see the little black dots on the rivets, they will actually put little, I think I heard one of the methods they used was they used Elmer's glue, almost like a watered down Elmer's glue, and they would take a paint, toothpick, and they would dip it in the glue, and they would put a dab at every location where there's a black dot projected onto the aircraft, so they could get the rivet locations precise. And it's interesting. I mean, it's as simple as a divot, even if it just looks visually different, where there's little rivets. I mean, as much detail as you want to put on it. A lot of people with the FT aircraft, just putting the Merlin exhaust, manifold on it, really brings that extra little scale detail. Oftentimes stickers, like on the jets with the air intake little chevron at the inlet to the jet intakes, putting those kinds of things on, the no step here, little stickers and things like that. Some of the scale details of especially if you're replicating a specific warbird squadron or anything like that, having the squadron insignia, taking pictures of the original from, there's so many museums out there with these tremendous restored airplanes. You can take the details from those pictures that you can access there. You can probably even call the museums, and they'll probably send you additional details if you need them. And they can really help you do that kind of work. It's pretty awesome. Like I think on my P-61 Black Widow, the cockpit details was taken mostly from a paper model, but you can see that if I really wanted to, I could take a bunch of little wire tubes and things like that and glue them in place and paint them up, and then it would have all those details in there. They're 3D print little bits and bobs. This is where a 3D printer really kind of shines in helping the hobby really come alive. So, yeah. so those are kind of, and then let's talk about, so that's the exact scale. And again, you're looking at measurement reductions. If the plane has, 23 inch, 23 foot wingspan, and you're doing a 1/12 scale, it's a 23 inch wingspan instead of 123 foot, right? So you look at those measurements, you make the adjustments. A CAD drafting programs really make that simple. You can take your plans, as long as those plans or 3 views are to scale, you can set those scales and then reduce them down to what you can use. And then what you build is a scale aircraft. And it's up to you as to how much detail you want to put in. You do semi-scale. Semi-scale looks very much like the full-scale version, but they're not exactly the same. Oftentimes, the airframe of the semi-scale RC aircraft may be slightly different from the full-scale version to improve flight characteristics. For example, increasing the rudder size or the elevator size to compensate for the difference in the way air flows over scale models. Because remember, air effects don't scale. For example, like the Park's own T-28 Trojan, it's a perfect example of a semi-scale model. The airframe's been modified slightly to make it fly a little bit better as an RC aircraft. Oftentimes, they're not going to have an exact replica of the airfoil. They'll use more traditional Clark Y instead of whatever NACA airfoil it is. But unless you're an expert, you're really never going to be able to tell. They'll have the broad markings, but they're not going to have all the details. But when you watch it fly at, hey, that's good from 10 feet out, you'll never see the difference, and it won't really matter except to you on the ground. Oftentimes, if there's a cockpit panel, it's pretty bare bones. You'll just have basically like a panel with a couple, general circles, and that may not be accurate, but at least it gives you a sense of a cockpit, right? If you are looking for a scale model that flies well and doesn't take 2.5 years to build, that's your go-to, the semi-scale, also known as sport scale, and then that might be the right choice for you. Or you can go with standoff scale. Without the trained eye, it's difficult to see the difference between a scale and a semi-scale model. It's also pretty easy, but it's also pretty easy to spot the standoff scale airplane. Standoff scale is made to resemble the fully full-scale version while standing off at a distance, but as you get closer, it's clearly nothing like the full-scale version. For example, like a cub with floats and things like that. It's this big, giant, thick wing that, like the Hobby Zone Super Cub, has a good standoff scale. It's close enough. It's got, the main markings, but you're not going to see any main details at all. The sizes of the tail and rudder surfaces are oversized. The floats are oversized or, put a little differently so that, it flies well. Looks good. It's good enough for my bench, right? And that's really what you're looking for. You can tell, hey, that's a Cub. When it's flying by, you know what it is. But as you get close, like there's no details in it, except some maybe general window decal kind of things, or maybe like the side stripe. So I think that's really about it. So just let's go over a quick way to figure out what scale is your model, right? And it's easy to find it out. It's really if it's a particular scale of aircraft, it's simple. You just divide the wingspan of the model of the airplane by the wingspan of the full scale airplane to get the ratio. You could actually use any dimension you like, really, if it's scale. But the wingspan tends to be the easiest to measure, and it tends to be a best overall representation, for the aircraft. You're far more likely to get an accurate count on the scale on that. For example, if your scale model has a wingspan of 5 feet, your full scale airplane will have a wingspan of 25 feet. Then and it'd be considered a scale of 1 to 5 scale, or 1/5 scale. And of course, if you want to know a little bit more, get heavily involved, or see more details, you can go and look up like a Flying Scale magazine. Literally, it's a bi-monthly publication that's geared towards that kind of thing. And there's a number of, I would say not a number, but there's a bunch of them, and you can tell like the AMA magazine has usually a segment in its magazine that is kind of highlights some of that, like let's get into the details kind of stuff. And there'll be tips and techniques oftentimes in there on how to get scale effects. For example, like what I told you with the, I've also seen it done with CA, where doing the rivets. Kind of you just put it down. I mean, they take a long time, but when you're done, they really come out well. And it's a difference between when somebody's looking at your model, when they come up to the bench, at the field, they go, oh my gosh, look at that! You really went to all that detail, especially if they know that it was hand built. So yeah. All right. So I don't really do the outro very well. I think we're at the end of our third part of the show, third half of the show. So I want to thank everybody for listening in. I know this was I'll call it a short episode. It was a solo episode. I don't really enjoy doing these. I think they're a lot more fun to sit down with Joe and just chat and go back and forth. So not a huge deal, but I did want to get this out to you guys. I wanted you to know about the community build night, December 2nd. Let me just double check. I believe it's December 2nd. December 2nd, Friday, 8 to 11 p.m. Look for us on our Discord forum. We'll have a link in the doobly-doo. We'll have a link in the show notes here. With that, I want to thank everybody for listening and coming out to listen to the show. If you want to help us out in any way, you could spread the word by seeing if you can get one or two of your flying buddies to listen to the podcast, see if they like it. Tell them to listen to one of your favorite episodes, one of the ones that grabbed you. I want to thank all of our patrons for helping us out every week. It's what helps keep the lights on and the website up and these episodes pumping out, and we really appreciate your support. If you want to join them, you can join them at patreon.com/aviationrcnoob. You can visit us at our website at www.aviationrcnoob.com. You can find us on all of your local, whatever podcast listener, just look us up, Aviation RC Noob, NOOB, and you'll find us. Again, just join us on our Discord when you get a chance. Say hey. You got a question, got a comment, got an itch you want to scratch, I'm sure they'll help. Everybody there is really supportive and helpful. And I want to thank everybody for being part and making this hobby an amazing place to be. With that, I'm going to end it. And I'd like to, just wish everybody the happy Thanksgiving. And we look forward to seeing you guys on the other side of the holiday. Joe and I should be able to get together. You'll hear from us on the 3rd, I think. Yeah, I think that would be the 3rd. Would that be right? Yeah. I think we're not scheduled one. It's the 3rd. We'll talk to you then. Hopefully you come out to the build night and we can talk about that. I want to thank you and good night.